Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down the American South before the Civil War, a society that got incredibly rich by building a brutal system. We're going to see how King Cotton created the wealthiest, but also the most conflicted region in the whole country. This Explainer is going to cover the key facts you need to answer exactly that question. We'll look at the economy that powered its rise, the terrible human cost of that wealth, and the ideas that literally split the nation in two.
So let's kick things off with a pretty wild fact. By 1860, the American South was producing 2/3 of the entire world's cotton. Yeah, you heard that right. This wasn't just some crop. It was a global economic juggernaut.
Okay, here's our plan. We'll start with the economic boom of King Cotton. Then we'll get into the human cost for the enslaved people who made it all happen. After that, we'll look at the unique society it created. And finally, the South's big plans to expand its empire.
First up, Section 1, Cotton is King, and how it became the economic engine of the South. So, to really get this period, you gotta know this word, antebellum. It's just a term that means before the war, and we use it to talk about the decades right before the American Civil War kicked off in 1861.
The whole cotton explosion really started with one single invention, the cotton gin, developed by Eli Whitney. Before this thing, separating the sticky seeds from cotton fiber was incredibly slow, tedious work. This machine changed all of that.
And here's why it was such a game changer. The gin made producing cotton on a huge scale actually profitable. Suddenly, one person with a machine could clean 50 pounds of cotton a day. Before, it was maybe 1 pound a day, by hand. So this just unlocked unbelievable potential.
And this timeline just shows you the insane result. We're talking a full-on cotton boom. The U.S. went from growing basically zero cotton to cranking out over 2 billion pounds a year by 1860. And of course, this whole economic miracle was built on the backs of millions of enslaved people.
Southern politicians got so arrogant about their economic power that they started saying things like, "Cotton is king." They honestly believed that their control over the world's cotton supply made them untouchable.
Now, this is a really critical cause and effect. In 1807, the U.S. banned the international slave trade. But at the same time, the demand for labor in the cotton fields was skyrocketing. So what happened? It created a huge and absolutely brutal domestic slave trade, where families were torn apart to move workers to the Deep South.
So, here's what you need to remember from this section. The cotton economy connected the South to the whole world and made it rich, but it also made it super dependent on everyone else.
Okay, let's move on. This incredible wealth came at a staggering human cost. So for Section 2, we're going to focus on the lives of the millions of enslaved people who were the real power behind this cotton kingdom.
So, how did slaveholders justify this system? Well, they pushed an idea called paternalism. They basically claimed they were like fathers, just looking out for the best interests of the people they enslaved.
But this whole idea of paternalism was just a mask for a horrible reality. It was an ideology made up to justify total control, incredible violence, and the constant threat of selling family members away from each other forever. Now, a quick recall. What was the ideology used to justify slavery? That's right. It was paternalism.
But enslaved people were never just passive. They resisted in so many ways. It could be small, everyday things, like working slowly or accidentally breaking a tool. But it was also about keeping their culture alive, with things like trickster stories, and sometimes it meant organized, violent rebellions.
Two of the biggest were the Louisiana Rebellion in 1811 and, maybe the most famous, Nat Turner's Rebellion in 1831. These uprisings sent waves of terror through the white South and led to even stricter, more brutal laws.
So remember this. Enslaved people created their own strong communities and cultures to survive and fight back. Through family, religion, and stories, they held on to their humanity inside a system designed to strip it away. All right, next up, let's look at the society that this whole system created. Section 3 is all about the culture of the white South.
Now this is really fascinating. Take a look at this chart. The vast majority of white Southerners didn't enslave anyone. A tiny group of planters, we're talking just 3%, owned most of the enslaved people and held almost all the wealth and power.
And that's a key fact, something that comes up on exams all the time. In 1860, 2/3 of white Southern households owned no slaves. So why did they support the system? Well, many hoped they could one day join that planter class themselves.
This small elite group lived by a very strict code of honor. For them,
Your public reputation was everything. And if you felt insulted, it was a huge deal, sometimes even leading to a formal duel with pistols.
And to protect slavery politically, guys like John C. Calhoun came up with some pretty wild ideas. One was the concurrent majority. Basically, he argued that a minority region, like the South, should have the power to veto national laws that it didn't like. And the defenses of slavery got more and more extreme. People started to argue that it was a positive good, even claiming that enslaved people in the South were better off than factory workers in the North. They also pushed racist pseudoscience to try and prove that black people were inferior. So the main thing to remember here is that Southern culture was totally dominated by a small, powerful elite who built a whole society around honor and, above all, defending the institution of slavery.
Let's move to our final section. This society wasn't just on the defensive, it wanted to get bigger. We're going to see how the South tried to expand its empire of slavery.
One way they tried to expand was through something called filibustering. This is where private citizens, called filibusters, would basically launch their own little military invasions to try and grab new land.
Cuba was their #1 target. Southerners desperately wanted to add it to the U.S. as a big new slave state. A big part of that was fear. They were terrified it would become a second Haiti, a free black republic right on their doorstep. So what was the secret memo about taking Cuba? That was the Austin Manifesto.
The Austin Manifesto was a secret diplomatic memo that basically said the U.S. should try to buy Cuba from Spain, and if Spain said no, then the U.S. should just take it by force. When this memo leaked, people in the North were absolutely furious.
These filibusters also set their sights on Central America. One guy, an American named William Walker, actually managed to conquer Nicaragua for a short time in 1855. And what's the first thing he did? He made slavery legal. And here's the key takeaway for this section. The South wasn't just sitting back, it was actively and aggressively trying to expand its empire of slavery into the Caribbean and Central America.
All right, that was a lot. Let's do a super quick final review of the must-know facts from this chapter.
Eli Whitney's cotton gin in 1793 fueled the cotton boom. The 1807 ban on the foreign slave trade led to a booming domestic slave trade. Paternalism was the ideology used to justify slavery. In 1860, 2/3 of Southern white households owned no slaves. John C. Calhoun proposed the concurrent majority. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 was a major slave uprising. The Austin Manifesto in 1854 was a secret plan to seize Cuba. And filibusters were adventurers who tried to create new slave states by force.
And that leaves us with one final thought. With an economy this powerful and a culture so unified around a single cause, what forces could possibly be strong enough to bring the entire Cotton Kingdom down? Thanks for joining us.